We're back for another week of pop politics.
Yay! Let's get started. So, the first thing on our list, starting with pop culture, was IHOP.
Yeah.
If you don't know what this is, it was the restaurant chain IHOP.
So, like...
International chain of International House of Pancakes. And they've been teasing on social media, like, for the past week, like, we're changing the P to a B, and we're gonna be IHOP. What do you think the B stands for? And everyone was like, what? They're changing their name.
Brunch.
Bacon.
Something that makes sense for their brand.
And everyone's like, whoa, are they really changing their name?
Yeah, and the rest of their name is like, I don't know, it's mostly all caps and stuff, and the B was like this weird lower caps that didn't quite make sense because they were just flipping the P. It just looked weird.
And this whole time I was like, is this for real, or is this just a dumb gimmick for a new menu item? Well, I was right. It was a dumb gimmick for a new menu item. The B stands for burgers, of all things. Everyone was like, what? And apparently this is an effort to showcase and promote their like lunch and dinner menus, and not just breakfast. Which, okay, whatever. But I mean, you don't go to IHOP, at least I don't go to IHOP when I want a good burger.
No one thinks about... people think about
IHOP. You stick to what you're good at.
People think about IHOP at 1 a.m. when they're, like, really drunk, or high school kids who need somewhere to go when they've been out too late, and or college kids, you know, and need somewhere to, like, let's go out for midnight pancakes. IHOP. Sounds good. You know, like, people do not think about... And I think that's part of the marketing strategy here, is that, like, they're trying to get people to come after breakfast and before 1 a.m.
Yeah. And, like, it... From a PR standpoint, like, it worked because it got everybody talking about IHOP. And, like, it generated a ton of traffic and interest. So, it worked that way. My question is it going to reflect in the sales? Like, did a bunch of people go out to IHOP to get burgers because of this campaign, or is everyone just like, that's dumb? What was funny is what was to see all the other like restaurants and fast food places troll IHOP on Twitter.
Yeah, like Burger King was Pancake King for a little bit.
And Wendy's and like a lot of them tweeted about and just trolled IHOP. It was so funny. So
yeah, like their closing video for this week, because they announced this like on Monday, and on today they had this little video of like, it was like, thanks for playing along, but the P in playing kept flipping between a B and a P, so we'll see if they go back to...
it was a dumb gimmick. Yeah,
it really was.
Okay, next thing on our list is the World Cup. So, 2018 World Cup started this week in Russia. Notably, the United States did not qualify. I saw a lot of things online. It was like, if you're a U.S. fan, like, here's a quiz on who you should root for. And it was just
This is who
funny.
You should be paying attention to, because you don't pay attention to
Did you see the
else.
French embassy tweet?
No.
The French embassy tweeted, let me pull it up real quick. It just like, it was funny. I was just like, oh, you're so clever.
So while you look that up, I think the first soccer game has happened, right?
A few
of them. I saw like
4 have happened.
Okay, I saw some buzz around, like, I think it was
Spain and Portugal played today, and they tied. I actually watched it. It was a really good game. Also, Morocco and Iran have played. Uruguay and Egypt and Russia and Saudi Arabia have all played. Okay, so here's the French embassy. It says, so the French embassy in the U.S. says, hey, American soccer fans, the U.S. might not have made it to the World Cup this year, but your oldest ally did. Don't let your red, white, and blue face paint go to waste. Join us in cheering on Lace Blues in the World Cup. Don't lose your enthusiasm.
That's awesome.
Like... That was clever. So clever. So, yeah, I think the World Cup is awesome. I think I love watching soccer, so this is a great time. I even filled out a bracket, which is currently sitting on my coffee table, just because I'm nerdy like that. And it was fun. So, it'll be interesting to see who will win. The biggest chatter And, like, all the things I've been reading about odds and favorites, I've really been seeing 4 main countries pop up. And that is Germany, Brazil, Spain, and France. So my prediction is they'll be the final 4, and one of those will win. Mm-hmm. I predicted Germany because they were the 2014 champions, so it'd be cool for them to do it back-to-back, but...
Right. Well,
we'll see what happens. So... And the World Cup is, like, I think if I read correctly, it is the largest watched sporting event in the world. The U.S., it doesn't, like, seem huge, especially since we're not in it this year. Like, nobody is, like, as into it.
Yeah.
But, like, billions of people watched the last World Cup. Like, with a B, billions.
Soccer is huge, literally everywhere else.
It's the biggest, so... It's hugely popular, so even more than, like, the Olympics, the World Cup is way more popular worldwide. Mm-hmm. Speaking of World Cup and the United States, the 2026 World Cup was awarded this week, and it was awarded to a united North America bid between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. So the United States last hosted the World Cup in 1994. Mexico has hosted twice before, like back in the 70s and 80s. Canada never has. They hosted the Women's World Cup in 2015, but they've never hosted the men's. So,
isn't this the bid where, like, 90% of the games take place in the U.S.?
Yes. I was about to get to that. So this, the 2026 World Cup will be the first World Cup that will have the expanded format. So currently the World Cup has 32 teams. They're going to expand it to 48. And I think they're going to play, is it 90 or 80 games? I think it's 80 games that are going to be played total. 10 will be played in Canada, 10 in Mexico, and the rest of the 60 will be played in the United States. So it's basically an American Cup. I don't know why, like, they did this, like, united thing, because the United States easily could have hosted it by itself.
Well, it was probably a sign of good faith and stuff, but, like...
Yeah, and this is interesting. We'll get into the politics section. Right now, relations with our North American allies are not good right now.
With any of our allies, really.
Yeah, but specifically Mexico and Canada with tariffs and things. So it's interesting that, like, amidst all that, we still could come together. And it's cool that, you know, sport really is the great uniter. No matter what happens, we can all come together for something like the World Cup or the Olympics or, you know, whatever it may be. It's cool that we can come together. Now, the big question is whether, now that we've been awarded it, the 3 countries can actually, like, work together and pull it off successfully. Right. And some people have been calling it the NAFTA World Cup, which I think is funny.
Makes sense.
So, yeah, look forward to hosting the World Cup in 2026. Okay, the next thing, also on sports, the Golden State Warriors won the NBA Finals, and as per tradition, the winning sports teams are invited to the White House. But, as we have seen recently, Trump and sports teams have clashed. Trump famously disinvited the Philadelphia Eagles recently. So, and Trump has already said preemptively that he's not inviting the NBA champions to the White House. That was back before they had won. So the Warriors know they're not invited. But I saw something interesting that, like, Nancy Pelosi is inviting the Warriors to Capitol Hill. So she's invited the Warriors to, like, Capitol Hill, and they're going to do, like, some visits to schools and things. So they're going to visit Capitol Hill and not the White House.
Interesting. Well, I think, didn't the Eagles also get invited to the White House? Am I making stuff up now?
They did, but then, like, they got disinvited, and then Trump held a, like, a, quote, celebration of the flag.
Did I say White House?
Yeah.
I meant Capitol Hill.
Oh, I'm not sure. I'm not sure on that.
Because I know they normally get invited to the White House, and then there was that whole thing where,
that whole dumb thing.
Yeah.
Oh, you're not gonna come? Well, you're disinvited.
Yeah.
Like, such a stupid 7th grade girl move. Like, you know what I mean? It's just, but that's a whole, we won't get into that.
Yeah, I saw a picture of a guy at the, like, Patriot, whatever, that he held instead, that Trump held instead at the White House, like, kneeling during the national anthem. Which I just was like, that's poetic.
Yeah, it was kind of funny.
Oh, Pennsylvania lawmakers invited Eagles to the Capitol.
Which makes sense.
To visit the Capitol. I can't decide if it's
Pennsylvania lawmakers, it's got to be, because the
It's from the Hill, though.
Oh. Maybe it's like Pennsylvania congressman.
The U.S. Capitol. Yeah, it was Pennsylvania. It was the Pennsylvania congressman that invited the Eagles to the Capitol. I'm not sure that they actually went, but yeah.
Cool.
The other thing that happened was the Stanley Cup happened this week, and the Washington, D.C. Capitals won that, the all caps. And that has been, because I have so many friends that are in D.C. right now, that has been all over my feed, which was just kind of funny. I'm not sure that they've ever won before, so it was just kind of fun.
I think I saw in reports that it was the first championship for a DC franchise since like 1992.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
So it's been a long time since they've had a championship in any sport. So
speaking of sports, even more than that. So the congressional vote. This is like halfway between. We're not quite done with what we're talking about in pop, but this was funny. So the congressional baseball game happens. So every year, all of like Congress puts together baseball teams and they play a game of baseball. And Senator Hatch from Utah's office put out this tweet with a picture of Senator Hatch, who is like, he's over 80. He's very old. And he just looks like, anyway, so this tweet reads, Senator Hatch regrets not being able to participate in the congressional baseball game. While he enjoys sport, he runs too fast, hits too hard, and throws too well, and it simply wasn't fair to the other athletes. And I just cracked up.
He's 84 for reference.
Yeah. So anyway, it was funny. So there's that.
Okay, moving on. We're gonna now move into the world of business mergers, because there's a lot of like entertainment company business mergers going on. So we've talked about before how Disney had bid for some of 21st Century Fox's assets, and it was like where is it? $52 billion. Well, this week Comcast swoops in and makes an offer for $65 billion.
Oh my goodness.
And so, it'll be interesting to see what ends up happening between, does Comcast win? Does Disney win? Yeah. And it brings up the question, both of these conversations, we're also going to talk about AT&T Time Warner. But it brings up the question of, like, when is too big, and, like,
right.
monopoly and conglomerates.
And when is it considered a monopoly? Because the Time Warner AT&T merger was being contested in court for just this purpose, right? Like, the Trump administration had...
Department of Justice.
Right, were trying to block this because they were saying this is a monopoly, this is not fair to everyone else, and AT&T and Time Warner were saying, like, actually it's the opposite, like, we're a phone company and a content creation company, so, like, this makes sense for us to merge it because you've got, like, Netflix and Amazon who are creating and disseminating content, and so we want to be in the same level playing field. And the courts, it doesn't specify which court, I can't remember which court it went to, agreed with them. So if you'll remember, like, Time Warner is, like, the owner of CNN, and I'm trying to think what else.
Are you talking Time Warner?
Time Warner.
Warner Brothers, CNN,
right.
HBO, Cartoon Network.
Mm-hmm.
So... a whole slew of...
Right, so they won the ability to go forward with this merger, and that was completed this week as well, after they won this court case earlier in the week. So you get into this, like, I mean, there's still a lot of conversation, a lot of buzz about what do you consider a monopoly, when do you get to a monopoly, and obviously the courts agree that because AT&T and Time Warner are fundamentally two different types of companies, that this wasn't too much of a monopoly, but, like, we'd be saying the same thing if, like, I wonder if we'll say the same thing if Disney tries to acquire greater shares in, like, another streaming service, or, tries to create their own streaming service or whatever. So
Disney is creating their own streaming
What am I
service
saying?
next year. But it's going to be just Disney content. But you're right. It does...
But it does, like, when is Disney getting to be too much? And why haven't we said something about that? Because they have acquired so much stuff.
I think
they practically own the world.
Well, Disney owns... There's Disney, there's Pixar, there's Marvel, there's Lucasfilm.
Right.
they own so much, and they're getting so big. They own ESPN, ABC. The Disney portfolio is huge. And I did a school project on this once, and it was fascinating. But, like, they're huge, way too big. Anyways, that is another discussion for another day. But it's interesting to see the media landscape, and in recent years it has it's been conglomerating.
Yeah.
It used to be all these companies, and now they're owned by these giant behemoths. Disney, Time Warner, Viacom, and there really aren't very many different owners in the media landscape these days.
Right. Well, on that note, we're going to move on to politics, where things just get more depressing if you believe in the global world order. So last weekend, really, we talked about in our last podcast that, like, when we were recording on Friday evening, Trump had just arrived at the G7 in Canada, and there hadn't really been anything happening yet. And so the next day was, like, the full meetings, and they came to an agreement, as they usually do. So the G7 is set up in such a way that each of these leaders are on a level playing field and all kind of have the same kind of pull and sway. And so when they were meeting, there are a lot of pictures that were released that were like the rest of the leaders kind of talking at Trump while Trump sat there with his arms crossed, like, kind of petulantly. And they had come to an agreement on this document that they were all going to sign. And as Trump was leaving to go to the Singapore summit, Trudeau went out and had this press conference on the topic of the tariffs that was saying, like, basically, if Trump goes forward with these tariffs, we will be very sad about it, but we will be forced to take actions in response to that. And so as Trump is, like, flying across the world to Singapore, he tweets out some pretty nasty things about Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who is the Prime Minister of our closest ally, Canada. Like,
of our neighbor.
Yeah, of our closest geographic ally, as well as closest, like, and like, if you can't get along with Canada, who can you get along with, right? Like, there is no one left. North Korea. You're right.
Well, so, and that has been the split screen lately, is Trump is feuding with our long-standing traditional allies, Canada,
Germany,
Mexico, with tariffs.
Yeah.
Germany,
also
France,
tariffs.
The UK. I mean, these are our longest and closest allies. And then the next day, he goes and meets with Kim Jong-un and praises him that he's a decent guy, he's honest, has a great personality.
Doesn't even talk about
the Everybody loves him in his country. Side note, they're forced to, like, if you
we're not even gonna talk about, like, the prisoner, like, the way that they treat their prisoners, and that they have these, like, labor camps in North Korea. It's ridiculous. So anyway, he tweets about Justin Trudeau, and I can't remember what exactly words he says, but there's an aide who calls Trudeau a backstabber. Like, a backstabber.
And then Peter Navarro, who is the White House trade advisor,
that sounds right,
went on some TV station and said that there's a, quote, a special place in hell, unquote, for people who cross Donald Trump.
Yeah.
About Justin Trudeau. Like, oh, it's bad.
And then Trump withdrew his signature on this, like, agreement that the G7 had come to together. Oh, also, before even getting to the G7 summit, Trump had requested that we let Russia back into the G7, because it was formerly the G8, and it was the G8 before Russia invaded Ukraine and took Crimea.
And then Trump is, of course, saying, well, like, Obama gave Crimea to Russia. No, they didn't. No. Putin invaded. Like, dude, know your history. And apparently, I've seen some reports, they're not 100% confirmed, so they're just reports. But Trump was telling other leaders of the G7 that Crimea belonged to Russia because they spoke Russian there.
So
because they were ethnic
This is
Russians.
The same guy who's calling out Canada's prime minister, right? That stood in a room like a week and a half, 2 weeks ago with Justin Trudeau, and they were having this, like, joint press conference. And Trump, and it was about the tariffs, and that was coming up, blah blah blah. So Trump's like, these are the same people that set our White House on fire, and everybody was like,
oh yeah, It was on a phone call.
Oh, was
Justin
it a phone
Trudeau.
call?
And he said, well, you guys burned down the White House.
And everybody was like, did you, like, pay attention to history class?
Referring to the War of 1812 when it was the British.
It was the British, but they came down through Canada. And actually, the War of 1812, from the Canadian perspective, is a war of aggression on the part of the United States, like, trying to take part. Like, they still see it that way. Anyway, like, it was us coming to take more territory. So, just this whole, like, really, like, Justin Trudeau is... He's the prime minister. He's the president that America wants right now. We have severe envy. A lot of us. Mostly because he has great socks. And I once spotted him wearing R2-D2 socks. And that was incredible.
He has been known.
So he has really great socks. Like, that is, like, the hands down, I would have him. He's also just a great guy. So, anyway, so the fact that we're feuding with him and the fact that he called him that he was called a backstabber and not a great guy, and like it just is baffling to so many of us that we can be so blasé about insulting and getting angry with our closest allies, and then turn around and praise, like Emmeline Stewart said, the North Korean dictator who does terrible things on a regular basis.
So, Trump even left the G7 early.
Right.
It
wasn't a day early. It was
a couple, but it was before the event was over.
Right. It was enough time that he was able to, that he didn't actually sign the document.
So he, left early, and it was just, such a baby. Anyways, so that was my reaction. So... he flies to Singapore, and oh my goodness, Singapore was the site of the world's media frenzy this week. I think I read in some reports there were some 2,500 journalists who convened upon Singapore to cover this summit.
Wow.
So, yeah, right? Interestingly enough, the night before the summit, it was Kim Jong-un who was out and about in the city, touring the city, touring sites,
going to a casino.
Singapore foreign minister was snapping selfies with him.
Yeah.
And, people were, cheering him wherever he went. And it was so bizarre.
You don't expect that from the reclusive leader of the government kingdom.
This is the farthest he's ever traveled. Since becoming... he became leader.
Because he was educated in Europe.
In Switzerland, yeah. But he's very reclusive, and so it was so odd to see him just out and about and free for the media to snap pictures of him. Of course, this North Korean state media was plastering that all over, showing look at our leader, he's out in a cool city. Because on the flip side, Donald Trump stayed home. He stayed in his apartment. I was listening to a podcast that was talking about. That's what I meant. That was talking about how when Trump travels, he doesn't like to travel to sightsee. He goes, he does his business, he moves on, he stays at his hotel. So that was interesting because he really didn't do anything. And there was also a Washington Post report out, I think today, that said when Trump got to Singapore, he was like, why can't we just have the summit now? Let's move it up. And he would tried to move the summit up, and it was Secretary of State Pompeo and Press Secretary Sarah Sanders that said, whoa,
you need to not.
Let's just leave it where it is. We can use the time to prepare. Yeah. And so he really was antsy to get out of there. Right, because I think there was a full day. I think they got to Singapore on Sunday. Yeah. Singapore. There was at least 24 hours. And then there was 24 hours because they didn't meet till Tuesday morning. Right. So Tuesday morning, Trump and Kim Jong-un met for the first time, and it was a pretty somber occasion. They met on this red carpet with the flags of their countries behind them, and they shook hands, and then they went in for to talk, to have their meeting. Their first meeting was just them and their translators, nobody else, no aides, no nothing. And so everyone was like, "Huh, that's interesting." Yeah. And I think it was 20 minutes. That sounds right. Or something. So that was the first meeting. Then they had an expanded meeting with Secretary of State Pompeo and National Security Advisor Bolton, and then a lunch. Yeah, there's even a picture of Kim shaking hands and smiling at Bolton, which was shocking. Odd. Another really odd. During this meeting, North Korean state TV put out footage of Trump saluting a North Korean general.
Really?
Yeah, you didn't see about
this?
this?
I didn't
this
see that.
just came out like today. And everyone was like, what? Like, that is kind of weird. Like,
yeah.
Knowing the North Korean military and like what they do and just like what the general stands for, it seems weird for the president of the United States to salute him. Yeah, but this also harkens back to Obama, when people freaked out when he bowed to, I think it was the Emperor of Japan. And everyone was like, oh my gosh, what is the president doing? Like, he shouldn't, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And then, like, he salutes a North Korean general.
That's
and
not
like,
on the same level, though.
I know, but it's the hypocrisy of the right. Because when Obama did it, everyone was like, oh my gosh, the president shouldn't do this, blah, blah, blah. But then when Trump salutes a North Korean general, they're like, oh, it's fine. He's making friendships. He's making relationships. And it's like, that is so hypocritical.
So then they signed this agreement, this comprehensive agreement. Okay, it was one page. You can't say anything comprehensive on an agreement when it's one page.
And what gets
because the Iran agreement, which took 5 years of negotiation, is 109 pages. Wow. And it's the most comprehensive nuclear disarmament deal that we've ever had. Like,
the thing that gets me is the Trump administration. Trump, Secretary of State Pompeo, Vice President Mike Pence, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders, they were all saying the CVID line: complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization. And guess what?
And for them, denuclearization means, like, no weapons.
And guess what phrase does not appear in the agreement they signed? That phrase. Mike Pompeo was asked, like, why isn't it in there? And he's like, oh, well, that's insulting. You would even ask that. Right. But I think it just said complete denuclearization. And to him, he said that complete, quote unquote, complete meant complete, verifiable, and irreversible.
And a lot of this one-page document, we make a lot more concessions than the Koreans. So the North Koreans recommit to their, like, statement that they're going to denuclearize. And in return, this vague promise. In return, we, like, say some things. And then later, Trump said that in, like, their, like, meetings and their talking, he committed to withdrawing the United States military from the war battle games, I guess you would call them war games, we hold with South Korea every year. And that came as a complete shock to South Korea, to Jim Mattis at the this Defense Department. Yeah, like, it came as a complete shock to everybody that he would make that promise, because we've had these, like, practices that we do with the military, both militaries, every year for as long as anyone can remember. Like, we've been doing these a long time, and Trump just was like, oh yeah, we're gonna give those up because it's seen as aggressive, which is totally a line from the North Koreans
and China,
right? Like, we're making a lot more concessions. Also, did you see that thing about the trailer that Trump shared with Kim Jong-un? Okay, so Trump had this, like, action film trailer thing that was put together. Yeah. And it, like, showed Kim and Trump, like, making the world a safer place and blah, 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 which is, like, a legit intelligence technique, because Kim Jong-un really loves action films. And so to get to him one way to get to him is, like, showing him what he likes. Yeah, what he likes, and showing him in a medium, like, well, this is what we can do together in a medium that we like. But, like, from Trump, it seems completely ludicrous, even though it's, like, a legit intelligence technique, that, like, somebody who, like, in a job that I would want, like, somebody, like, at a think tank or in one of the intelligence agencies was kind of like, look, we know that he loves he loves action films, like, let's make this trailer because that'll package it in a way that'll be palatable to Kim Jong-un.
Okay.
It just seemed ludicrous at the time.
I've watched some, maybe all. It looked more like North Korean propaganda, though, than a White House produced.
Well, and some of the reporters thought that
video.
too.
Yeah, when they started playing, everyone's like, "Oh, this must be a North Korea thing," and then Trump's like, "Oh, we made this," and everyone was like,
"Yeah." So
what?
They initially reported it as something that the North Koreans had brought to the table, and they had to be corrected that it was something the United States brought to the table. Anyway, the long and short of it is that, like, this was a great step forward in the fact that these two leaders met, but in the long run, like, unless the negotiators from the State Department and from from the North Korean side of things, and also the South Koreans and the Chinese can really come together and put together a comprehensive deal that like has these verifiable checks and balances and keeps the North Koreans in line and gives up reasonable concessions. Right now, it just looks like Trump has been taken out on a joyride and is totally not understanding how much he's given away. While the North Koreans have gotten a lot. Just for them, the legitimacy of having a picture with Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump is huge. Like, that is the only win they really needed from the summit, because it gives so much legitimacy to Kim Jong-un, and yet they got so much more out of us beyond just that. And we got really, really quantitatively, if you can look at it, if you kind of weigh the differences, we didn't get very much out of the summit at all. Like, we have no firm commitment to complete verifiable denuclearization. Right. There's still no definition of denuclearization.
There's no timetable. There's no verification methods. There's no nothing.
Yep.
So, yeah. Okay, so that's the big story of the week.
Right.
We just have a few quick ones to tick through. The next one is the State Attorney General of New York is suing the Trump Foundation. Remember the quote-unquote Trump Foundation. It's not really a foundation. It has been used, among other things, to buy a $10,000 portrait of Donald Trump, among other things. But the new Attorney General of New York, Barbara Underwood, is suing the Trump Foundation, and she's seeking to shut down the foundation to bar... what is it?
She's barring Trump from nonprofit work for 10 years.
For 10 years.
And the Trump adult siblings for 1 year.
Ivanka, Don Jr., and Eric for 1 year.
In New York.
In New York. One thing that has come out about the foundation is that the campaign and the foundation were like very closely linked.
Yeah.
There was a fundraiser in Iowa during the campaign for veterans, and it went through the foundation, but there are records that show that the Trump campaign directed how the funds should be spent, which is like so unethical and possibly illegal. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know the law, but maybe.
Well, and one of the other things that was really weird about this story is that the board of directors hadn't met for 19 years. And the treasurer didn't even know he was on the board of directors.
Really?
Yeah. Like, this is what I'm hearing from NPR. I was like, this doesn't sound like a legit business.
It's not a real foundation. If you want more background on the Trump Foundation, go see David Fahrenthold of the Washington Post. He did some great reporting back during 2016 about the foundation. So go see him.
Anyway, so they are being sued. On other news, legal news, when it comes to the Trump organization and the Trump campaign, Paul Manafort, who was the campaign manager for part of Trump's campaign, I think we talked about this last week. He was like being looked at again for witness tampering since his indictment, and he had a court date today and was sent back to jail. And
by the judge, she denied his bail and said, "Look, like, these allegations of witness tampering are troubling, so you're going to be, instead of house arrest or wait at home, you're going to jail."
Yeah.
And so, like, this isn't a sentence. It's just because of these, like, accusations of witness tampering, they can't trust him, so they're holding him in jail until his trial.
Because he was on house arrest being tracked by 2 different agencies. Like, he had 2 different bracelets that he was supposed to be being monitored by and still managed to witness tamper. So he's back in jail until trial.
The thing that gets me, and I tweeted out this, is it's so ironic. So ironic that after all the chants of lock her up and of all the statements out of Trump world that Hillary Clinton should be jailed, who is in jail right now? None other than someone from Trump's campaign. And, okay, I have another little thing to say here. Trump has been saying lately, like, oh, Paul Manafort didn't work for me very long, blah, 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 blah. He was the campaign chairman. Like, that is no small role. No. And he shepherded the campaign through the Republican National Convention, which is huge. Yep. So whenever Trump says that, like, tries to downplay Manafort's role, that's dumb, because he had a huge
Trump
role.
Tries to downplay everyone who's being, like, looked at right now. So that's part of it, too. The other thing that was really interesting this week is that the, Investigator General? What is his name? The guy at the FBI who is like the internal affairs dude. General. That one, Inspector General.
Oh yeah, that's another thing.
So they released their report that they were looking internally. They announced right before Trump took office, like 2 weeks before, that they were going to take a look at the FBI and Justice Department's conduct during the election cycle. And so they just wrapped that up. And there were a lot of things in this. Like, it's worth going and looking it up, but I'm only going to hit the highlights. So Comey and a couple of other FBI employees were recommended for, like, some censuring just because the way that they had conducted themselves wasn't super great during this time, and that like Comey should not have come forward with the news about like the Clinton emails during that time. There are some really great podcasts about this. I would definitely go listen to some of those or read an article, because I'm just not going to be able to hit everything with the depth that you need to understand it, because it's like a 500-page document. And the other thing that was really interesting about this is that it came out and said that James Comey used a personal email instead of, which was out of sync with, with policies, FBI policies at that time. And so the really great thing that came out of that statement particularly is that Hillary Clinton quote tweeted this and wrote, "But my emails," which is probably the greatest troll of all time in this way. And not of all time, but like for this news cycle. It was really great. There are a lot more things that were kind of mentioned in there, and it's worth going and reading like I said, reading a story or listening to a podcast about that topic. So I think that wraps up all of the legal news, right? I think we covered everything. Yeah. So the last politics story for this week takes us to California.
Let's go west. So there have been many attempts to break up California into separate states. It's a narrative in California that they're so big, that their representation is so disproportionate to other states. And it's true. It's the most populous state in the nation. They have millions and millions of people. And it's hard. I mean, 2 senators, how many people do they represent? Right. The representatives, the governor, all of it. So there have been many efforts in the past in California to break it up, to make the representation more representative. And of course, Northern California versus Southern California, there's a cultural difference.
Right.
Like, it's not the same. You've got, like, you can go from, like, the wine country in the north to, like, the beaches and surfer mentality in the south. And it's just, there's a big cultural divide sometimes in California. So there is currently an effort, which is gaining steam, to split California into 3 different states. And it has gotten enough steam and enough support that it is now going to appear on the ballot in California in November. So residents of California will vote upon this. Mm-hmm. They're basically saying we're going to split it up. The proposed split will be 3. So there's going to be a Northern California, a Southern California, and a California, which I think would be way too confusing. There's an interesting map on how they're going to split it up. Basically, the regular California is Los Angeles, and it like goes up this weird strip up the coast to Monterey. And then Northern California is most of Northern California, and then Southern California is the rest. Yeah. But if this has a huge road ahead, I personally think it's unlikely that it will pass.
Yeah, I mean, we can't even get Puerto Rico to be a state, and they've been a territory forever.
So this has to pass by the voters of California. 2, it has to pass in the California state legislature, and then Congress would have to approve it. Yeah. So it's just got a huge road ahead. You're right. Puerto Rico is a perfect example. They're basically a state now.
And DC.
And DC, yeah. You're right. So it's it's probably not going to happen, but I think it's interesting, the effort.
Yeah. If it can get that much support, that is interesting. So, all right, that wraps up the politics section for this week. I don't think we missed anything too huge. If we did, no. There are other podcasts that are better than us. Okay, so soapbox this week is stews.
So, it was reported this week that Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump made at least $80 million last year while they're in the White House.
Really?
Yeah. Now, keep in mind, they are not paid by the government.
No.
So this is their positions in the administration are unpaid. Which everyone was like, okay, that's good for them when they did it, because they don't need the money, clearly, because they made $80 million. Now, it brings up a lot of questions, though. Like, where are they making this money? Just a few examples. Let's see if I can find it. Oh. Ivanka Trump has a stake in the Trump International Hotel in Washington, D.C., and that is valued between $5 million and $25 million. And what's interesting is a lot of Republican groups, conservative groups, foreign governments use the hotel for their events.
Right.
So they're basically, like, indirectly enriching the Trump family when they use the Trump hotel.
Which is kind of the point, right? And this is going back to the conflicts of interest conversation we've been having since Trump wouldn't divest himself or separate himself from his business when he became president, and then was including he was including Ivanka and Jared in the White House. So then we're back to this conflict of interest idea where if if Ivanka or Trump still have a stake in the hotel, then a lot of like foreign governments are going to try and hold events there so that they
like the
can
RNC
gain...
even holds events
right
there,
like this is gaining favor with the president, or
seems odd.
There are a lot of conflicts of interest. There's a reason why Jimmy Carter was forced to give up his beloved peanut farm when he became president.
Jimmy Carter's.
There are reasons why we ask presidents to separate completely from outside economic endeavors, because you have these like conflicts of interest that could be leveraged. Like, nobody's going to leverage a peanut farm, and yet he still gave it up.
Also, Ivanka Trump got a severance from the Trump organization. Like, why does she need a severance? It was like a couple $1 million severance package from the Trump organization. Like,
I don't know.
She doesn't need a couple $1 million in severance. Like, I don't get why they paid her severance. That doesn't make sense. It's just, all of this is just so shady and so weird. And it's interesting, like, back a couple administrations, Jimmy Carter, all of these things. Didn't Jimmy Carter try and, like, have his son in a position and he was told no? And then here we have Jared and Ivanka who are, like, front and center, taking on important issues like Middle East peace.
So the reason we have this,
relations with Mexico.
Right. So there's this, like, rule that you're not, as a president, you're not allowed to have close relatives in positions of power, and this rule was put in place because JFK obviously had Bobby as his attorney general, who wasn't super qualified for that job, but then ended up in this like groupthink situation that led to some things that could have gone better in history. And so then you have this rule now that like presidents can't have their like really
there's an
close...
anti-nepotism rule.
Yeah, because it leads to things like Jared Kushner being in charge of Middle East peace and having no background in that and no knowledge of how to smooth things over or how to try and make things better in the most contentious area in the world.
And at times he would like go over Secretary of State Rex Tillerson.
Right.
And like bypass him on things. And it's like, no. Like, he's not the Secretary of State.
Not. Right. So
it's just it brings up so many questions, and I'm just so... It was just like, really? They made $80 million, some of it off of the Trump hotel directly? It's
not right.
It's unsettling.
It's really unsettling. You're right. So, anyway, I think that about wraps it up. The whole administration is unsettling, but especially the fact that they're getting richer. And with that, we'll call it a week.